What's up, everybody? I'm Matt Gary, and in this episode of Coding with the Fours, we're going to go over what primitive data types are in Apex. Alright, everybody, welcome back to this Introduction to Apex tutorial series where we learn the fundamental skills necessary to become a developer on the Salesforce platform. In this episode, we are going to go over what primitive variables are in Salesforce and, when you would use them, why you would use them, all that kind of stuff. What the differences between a primitive data type is and a non-primitive data type. We'll check those things out. So, all right. In front of me here, we have from the Salesforce Apex Developer Guide itself all of the different primitive data types within Salesforce and what it means to be a primitive data type, right? So let's just start off by taking a look at this so that we understand it. By the way, if you do not know what a variable is, check out the tutorial just before this one. It goes over what variables are, so you kind of have a base understanding of what we're talking about before we go into primitive data types or primitive variables here. So I'll put a link in the description, and I'm sure there will be one right up above too. So let's first talk about what it actually means to be a primitive variable. A primitive variable is something that uses one of these primitive data types. And primitive data types are typically always types of data that are built into the language that you are currently using. So in Apex, as you can see here, we've got a bunch of built-in data types, as in as soon as you start using the language, even if you have nothing in your Salesforce org, you can start using in your Apex code any of these data types, right? Use a blob, a Boolean, a date time, all that kind of stuff. It's just there for you to use immediately. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a little bit when we go over some things. The second thing is that primitive data types, when you pass them into methods to be used, are passed by value instead of being passed by reference. And this is a huge thing that you need to know as a developer, and we'll see that in action in just a minute. And the third thing is that you can't modify the behavior of a primitive data type, which means that you can't add, new functionality to that data type. You can't add, new fields to that data type. You can't add anything to it that isn't already there and provided to you by the system. That's not always true in all development languages, but it is true in Apex. So those are the three main things. Primitive data types are built into the language. They're passed by value, not by reference when you're passing them to methods to be used. And you can't modify the behavior of primitive data types. And we'll go over all three of those in just a second. Some examples of what primitive data types are in Salesforce anyway, or in Apex, are blobs, booleans, dates, date times, decimals, doubles, IDs, integers, longs. This is kind of misleading but true. An object, although objects can be cast as primitive or non-primitive data types, so just know that it's important. Strings are not primitives in all languages, but they are in Salesforce in time. So we'll go over a couple of these when we write the code here in just a second. But if you want to check out these primitive data types, I'll put a link in the description of this video where you can go through and take a look at each one of these. I don't want to slow down this video too much by going through what each and every single one of them are. But this is the list of the primitive data types that you get out of the box in Apex, or that you just get in Apex. So if you want to check them all out, you can check out the link in the description, and there's good explanations for each one of them, right? All right, so first things first, let's figure out what it means for a primitive data type to be built into the language that you're using. In our case, Apex. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to bring up our IDE of choice. For me, that is Illuminated Cloud in IntelliJ. For you, that might be Visual Studio Code. And if you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about when I say IDE, go back a couple of videos and watch the video on what an IDE is and how to set both of them, at least the two most popular IDEs for Salesforce, up. All right, so first things first, let's create a class. And we'll name this class primitive data type example. Cool. And the first thing that we're going to do in here is create a string, one of the primitive data types in Apex. And we'll call it my string, and we'll set it equal to the word hi. And we'll create a method so that we can figure out what we can actually do with this string. Now I realize we have not gone over what methods are or how to use them yet in this tutorial series, but just a few episodes from now, or maybe even a couple, we will go over it, so stick with me. For now, let's just create the method so that we can figure out how these things work. So we'll say public void string example or something. And we will type my string, or reference this guy up here, and then use the dot operator to see what we can do with a string as developers, having not developed any code ourselves to do these things. So we can see that we have access to a capitalize method, a split method so that we can split our string into pieces, substring before, which means we can find strings before certain other strings in our string. We can figure out whether our string contains a string, and tons of other stuff, right? And I have written no code myself to do this. And if you're following along, I'm sure you've realized you've not written any code to do any of these things. So just by default, built in, the Salesforce language gives us all these capabilities. And we can take a look at that by just saying, my string equals my string.capitalize. Again, a method I did not create, but was built into the system. And we'll output this to a debug log and say capitalized string my string. And I've of course got to save this. And it's saved. So I'm going to bring up my anonymous Apex window down here. Grab this data type example equals, nope, not that, new data type example. All right, and let's see what happens. We can see down here that it indeed, if I zoom in anyway, it indeed capitalized our string of hi, right? So up here, I've just got a lowercase h, I, but when I called this capitalize method, it capitalized my string for me. And I didn't have to do that, I didn't have to do anything, right? I didn't have to write any code to manipulate this string really myself, which is pretty cool. So all the primitive data types have this kind of functionality. String has probably much more than most others, but that's what we mean by it's built into the system. And we can see different things, for different data types as well. So if I just made decimal, and in IntelliJ anyway, if I hit Control B on this, I can take a look into all the methods that I have available to me for decimal. You can do that on any of them, any primitive data type or any data type in general. If you hit Control B, which is actually the go to declarations and usages in IntelliJ anyway, then it'll show me basically the outline for this system class. It doesn't show me the code, but it shows me what's available to me by default. And you can see, even for the decimal class, I got tons of stuff, the ability to round it, and tons of other things, right? So primitive data types, when we say they're built into the language, that's what we mean. There's a bunch of stuff you can leverage without having to write any code. Whereas if I created my own data type, which you can do in several different ways in Salesforce, you would have to define all of those things yourself. I would have to create, if I created my own data type in Salesforce, I'd have to create a capitalized method for it. I'd have to create a substring method for it, all that kind of stuff, which we'll go over in the video right after this one, which is over non-primitive data types. So the second thing is, what does it mean to be passed by value instead of by reference, right? Let's figure that out, because it's extremely important. This might be one of, if not the most important things to understand about primitive and non-primitive variables. Primitive variables are passed by value, and that's incredibly important. So let's check this out. We'll just say public void pass my variable or something, right? And this will take two different variables so that we can see the difference between what it means to pass by a value and what it means to pass by reference. So the first thing it will do is we'll pass it a string, and we'll call it passed value, right? And the second thing we'll do is maybe we'll just pass it a contact, right? And we'll name this passed reference. And we will, up here, just create one more method. We'll say variable passer or something. And we'll work with this. So within this method, we're going to create a string, and we're going to create a contact, and we're going to pass it to this method down here, right? And so let's do that. We'll create a string called value string equals hello, and then we'll create a contact variable, contact reference, and we'll just create a new contact like so. And what we'll do is we'll call this pass my variable. We'll call this pass my variables method right here, and we will pass it the value string, and we'll pass it the contact reference. And then within this one, this pass my variable method here, we're going to try to manipulate both of them and see what happens when we get back to this method, right? So what we're going to do in here is we're going to say passed value equals chocolate, right? So we theoretically, anyway, we've taken this string that is the value of hello, we've sent it to this method here with that value of hello, and now we're saying, you know what? We want to change that value to chocolate or something, right? Now, let's see what happens when we come back to this method and we output that. We'll say system debug. This is the string after we pass it and return to the original method. And we will type in value string, right? And let's just see what happens if we save this. And we call this method in our anonymous apex. So we can see that we did get to this. And you can see that this is the the string after we pass it and return to the original method, and it's still hello. Even though in here we tried to set it to chocolate. It didn't work. Right? We didn't set it to chocolate. When we got back to this line, it just said, you know, it kept that original value of hello. And that's kind of what it means to be passed by value. I'm just sending the value of this string to this method. I'm not sending a reference or a pointer to this string, to this method, right? And let me show you with the contact what I mean by that. So we've got our contact that we've passed in. Let's see if we altered the contact, which we've named past reference, and we gave it a last name or something, right? We said Terrence is the last, that's really a first name. And maybe we'll give it a last name too, or first name too, of Larry. Who knows? And then let's output it here. So we'll say system.debug. This is the string, this is the contact after we pass it and return to the original method. Contact reference, right? And let's save that and see what happens. So just before we run this code here, let's make sure we understand what's going on. Right now we've got a contact that has nothing in it. There is no first name, there is no last name. Then we're passing it to this passMyVariable method, and we're giving it a first name and a last name. Now the question is, for this contact, which is a non-primitive data type, will it keep that when we get back to the system debug, or will it not keep it, right? So let's see what happens. So we've run that, and we can see down here that this contact was updated when we got back here. Now the string, the primitive data type, was not, but the contact was. And this is huge that you understand how this works. Because if you wanted this variable to be changed and sent back and reassigned to this variable, you would need to actually return it from this method, which is something we'll go over later. But basically, we are not passing a reference or a pointer to this variable here when they're primitive variables. We are when they're non-primitive, but we aren't when they are primitive. So if you pass this variable to another method, a primitive variable to another method, you're passing its value in only its value. And if you change its value within this method, it will not be reflected in the original method that you declared it in, right? On the other hand, if you're using a non-primitive variable, it passes it by reference of that variable. So you're basically passing, in a sense, a pointer that looks to this variable that exists here. And when you're down here in this other method, it's updating this same variable here, right? But it doesn't for primitive variable types. It's not updating it when you do that, which is very confusing and a little challenging to get used to, but this is something that's really important that you understand when you're using primitive variables, they pass by their value only and not by their reference. It's one of the most important things to know and to distinguish between the two data types. All right. Whew. I think hopefully maybe that was explained halfway decent anyway. But if it's not clear, definitely let me know. And I'd be happy to answer any comments or questions about it, of course. And the last one that we should go over is that you can't modify the behavior of primitive data types. What does that mean? What that means is if I wanted to add a new method to my string class, like, as we just saw, there's lots of methods for strings. I can capitalize things, I can create substrings, I can do whatever, blah, 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 tons and tons and tons of things. If I wanted to add new functionality to those methods, I can't. I can't go in to the string class, right, and decide I want to change how it works, right? I want to change how the capitalize method works, or I want to add a new method that, I don't know, that does something new to the string that Salesforce didn't provide to me out of the box with the Apex programming language. You can't do that. You'd have to create a new Apex class that was basically a new definition of strings or a string and build all that new functionality yourself, right? So you can't do that. Whereas if I wanted to, say, for the contact object in Salesforce, if I wanted to give it a new field, maybe I want to capture the contact's, I don't know, birthday, or I wanted to capture the contact's annual income or something, I can just go into Salesforce, create a new field, and then all of a sudden in my code, I've got that new field to work with, or whatever else. And if I went a step further, which I am 100% aware we have not gone over yet, but I went a step further and I created, classes that represent objects. So say I created a class that represents a dog or something. I could create methods in there that made the dog walk, or it made the dog run, or it made the dog lick you. I don't know, right? And so, yeah, I mean, with your own custom data types, whether they're Apex classes or they're custom objects within Salesforce, you can modify the functionality of those. But with primitive data types, you can't. You cannot alter anything. They are the way they are, and they'll always be the way they are until Salesforce decides to update them and give them more functionality themselves. So, or you got, you know what? I'm not going to go over that. You could, create your own wrapper for the string object and get fancy with it. Some people have. But that's not something we need to go over here and complicate things anymore. So hopefully you've got a decent understanding of what it means to be a primitive data type or to create a primitive variable in Salesforce. The three major things you need to know is that they are built in, primitive data types are built into the language that you're using. So they're built into Apex without you having to do anything as a developer. They're passed by value, not by reference. Probably the most important thing that you understand. And you can't modify the behavior of primitive data types. That is not in your control. So, sorry. I think that about does it for this video. So, in the next video, we're going to go over what non-primitive data types are, the different ways we can create them, and all that fun stuff. So, yeah, if you want to see the rest of this series and grow your skill set as a Salesforce developer, make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you know when I upload the next one, and yeah, that ought to do it. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.